Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to hearing from our speakers and engaging with all of you in this important topic. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I know people are still joining in from the waiting room, so welcome. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Babinski, and I'm the director of the Center for Child and Family Policy at Duke University. On behalf of the center, I'd like to welcome you to the Sulzberger Distinguished Lecture Series. The Center for Child and Family Policy sponsors this Sulzberger Distinguished Lecture Series to highlight the contributions of experts in child and family policy for our faculty, our research scientists, our staff, the Triangle community, and now, due to our virtual reach, scholars from around the country. Thank you so much for joining us. The series features experts who've demonstrated excellence in behavioral science and theory, as well as science to policy applications. The lectures are made possible through an endowment from the Arthur Sulzberger family. I'd like to thank Cynthia Sulzberger and her husband, Stephen Green, who are joining us this evening for this webinar. Thanks so much for your support of these important lectures. And now I'd like to introduce Lisa Janetian, Pritzker Associate Professor of Early Learning Policy Studies in the Sanford School of Public Policy and faculty in the Center for Child and Family Policy at Duke. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm also really looking forward to this evening's talk. Before I introduce our two speakers, just a bit of housekeeping. So our speakers have a coordinated presentation that will last about 45 minutes, after which we will open up the floor for questions. Please feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A, and when the speakers are done, I will try to sort through them and get through them as efficiently as possible and share them with the speakers for more conversation. So it's with my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers this evening. And Natalie Foster is co-chair of the Economic Security Project, which she co-founded in 2016, and an advisor to the Aspen Institute Future Work Initiative. Ms. Foster, Natalie, has a long history of thinking about and innovating around protecting and supporting the lives of economically vulnerable families in the US. She was founding CEO of an organization called peers.org to support people who work in the gig economy, as one example. Aisha Nyandoro is CEO of Springboard to Opportunities. It's Dr. Nyandoro, so welcome. We are happy to have you here this evening speaking with Natalie Foster. Springboard to Opportunities supports residents of affordable housing. Dr. Nyandoro is an innovator. She launched Magnolia Mothers Trust in Mississippi, and it was one of the first pilot programs to offer unconditional income to Black mothers in Mississippi, and something that she's going to speak about today. Her work uses a resident-driven approach to improve quality of life and end generational poverty. And I should also note that I've learned quite a bit from both of these speakers and honor their commitment to this topic. And they bring a very refreshing lens that really focuses on dignity of economically vulnerable families in the US. So I'm going to turn this over to, I think it's Natalie. You're going to go first. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I really wish that we could be on the Duke campus in person. I'm honored to share this conversation with my friend, my collaborator, and source of inspiration, Dr. Aisha Nyandoro. Aisha, do you want to say a few words before I
Oh,
dive in?
yeah. Thank you so much. So excited for this conversation. It's been the highlight of my week. And being in conversation with my good friend, Natalie Foster, about something that is so near and dear to our hearts, about how do you really go about centering the needs of those who are the most disadvantaged within our community when we're really talking about economic justice. So thank you to the entire Duke community and to the Family Foundation for making this possible. Turning it back over to you, Nat.
Thank you. So we came here today to talk about what happens when we give people money and the big idea of a guaranteed income. And we're going to get there. But first, let's lay out a snapshot of how the economy is working for most people. Now, before the pandemic, wealth concentration and income inequality were at all-time highs, worse than the disparities in the 1920s between the haves and the have-nots. Median net worth of white households was 7 times that of Black households, and women made just cents on the dollar compared to their white male counterparts. Women of color made even less. So in so many ways, COVID has exacerbated these problems today. And while so many of these discrepancies can be traced back to the beginning of the American racialized capitalism, the last 50 years of our economic system have seen significant structural shifts that make it even harder for families to get by. We have seen stagnant wages, a flattening of wages for an entire generation, meaning that if somebody started working in the 1980s and they continue to work today, they have seen very little wage gains for their entire work life. Now, this is despite a massive increase in worker productivity, which you can see on this graph. And all of those gains between wages and productivity have gone to the top. We have undertaken a massive shift from an industrial economy to a service economy with much more precarious jobs and lower wages than we'd had in the past. And is baked into all of this is a strong ideology that says the lack of security baked into this system is a personal failing. It's the pull yourself up by the bootstrap story, right? If you can't pull yourself up, then something is wrong with you. And this masks the fact that something is desperately wrong with the system. People were working. The economy, people are working, the economy is not. Now, during these massive structural changes that we've seen over the last 50 years to our economy, both parties would cut the very systems designed to support people in moments of need. In fact, welfare reform is now 25 years old this year. If it were a child, it would be making TikToks. Here is Ann Price and my colleague Dorian Warren laying out what welfare reform meant. I'm going to show a video and how it was cloaked in racist stereotypes like the welfare queen.
With welfare reform that took place in 1996, it fundamentally changed what states could do and have a lot of discretion in how they determined who was eligible, and the system became much more punitive.
All right.
It actually denied
We'll see if that comes back up in a minute. Suze, you can just let me know if it does. So this is the backdrop to the story that we're about to tell. A backdrop of persistent devaluation of labor in America, particularly the labor of people of color, despite having the highest labor force participation in the country. And there just didn't appear to be room in our politics on either side of the aisle to do things differently. But a few of us had the audacity to imagine something else, a world that saw the dignity in every human being, policy that supported people to be the decision makers of their own life, policy that centered racial and gender justice and provided people the economic security needed to take risks, to start businesses, and to pursue their dreams. We were imagining the adjacent possible. Now, this is an idea from biology, and it's summed up by the writer Stephen Smith in this way. He says, the adjacent possible is kind of a shadow future hovering on the edges of the present state of things, a map of all the ways in which the present can reinvent itself. Those who believed in higher wages and the fight for $15 an hour imagined something different and adjacent possible to the decades of incredibly low wage work. Those who believed that caregiving for the elderly, for kids, for the disabled was actually human infrastructure, and that investments made in both the pay of those care workers and the affordability of care, if we're ever going to build an equitable society, that was an adjacent possible. And Aisha and I believed in a world where monthly checks were a guarantee, something that shows up every month to ensure that there's an income floor, regardless of the crisis that are raging around us, from the fires out here in California where I live to the virus that has ravaged the country. We imagined a world with a guaranteed income, a floor through which no one could fall. And Aisha would start to take that out of the white papers and into the reality. A mutual friend connected us, knowing that we were both interested in direct cash to people. Now, I had been working on moving big economic ideas into the mainstream for about a decade, and I was very interested in the idea of guaranteed income. 2016 started organizing around it, and we launched Economic Security Project that year to do research, policy work, and to help catalyze a movement for guaranteed income. We started studying Alaska, how each resident gets an annual dividend check from the oil profits that they collectively own as Alaskans. We looked at what was happening internationally and the studies that organizations like Give Directly were undertaking to show how effective direct cash aid was in improving well-being and income volatility. And we worked closely then with Mayor Michael Tubbs of Stockton, California, and partnered on an early demonstration of guaranteed income to show just how popular it was. But back in 2016, I remember 2017, I remember walking the streets of Oakland where I live on the cell phone with Aisha Nyandoro, listening to her vision and thinking, this woman could change the world. And indeed, she would build the adjacent possible.
Thank you. So I remember that critical day and with talking to Natalie and really thinking about what it was that she was talking about and they were building as it related to the Economic Security Project, and what we were thinking about to really go about centering the needs of extremely low income Black mothers into the conversation of poverty, were they adjacent possible. We were really thinking about, for all of our ability to analyze and critique, we have become rooted in what is rather than what could be. And we were all about planning the what could be, which gave us the Magnolia Mothers Trust. The concept of a guaranteed income has long been a part of American history, including Black liberation movements, from the Black Panthers to the National Welfare Rights Organization to Dr. King. The basic premise is that it's an effective and direct way to pull people out of poverty and provide financial stability. This is especially true when looking at the economic fallout from the pandemic and how it's mainly hurt Black and Brown communities. A guaranteed income is different from a universal basic income in that it's targeted, not given to everyone. Since most guaranteed income programs are targeted at the poor and middle class, they have an outsized positive benefit for Black and Brown Americans, since they are the more likely to work low-wage jobs. The Magnolia Mothers Trust Program began disbursements in 2018, providing $1,000 monthly for 12 months to extremely low-income Black mothers that live in federally subsidized affordable housing. Next slide, Sleuths. It was born out of a simple yet radical idea. What if, when Black women were told us what it is that they needed, we believed them? This program from the very beginning was designed to challenge the structures that hold Black women in this country, particularly poor Black women in the Deep South, the stereotypes around work ethic, the paternalistic nature of our social safety net, and who is deserving of help and dignity. That MMT has always been about building a movement, empowering Black women, and unapologetically positioning them as worthy and capable and valuable. This program is based on community. The solution to the program was designed in partnership with the women that I work with. Since we started this project back in 2018, we have supported over 230 low-income Black mothers. Y'all, we started with 20, and now we're at 230. So we started from the bottom, we're sort of here, we're still going to the top. And when we really started designing this program, it was conjured, like I said, from the vision of the people that we work with. I met with moms. I'm a researcher by training. So whenever we have questions, I always go back to the people. I met with the moms and I said, what is it that you need? And the answers were varied. It was needing reliable transportation to get to school. It was wanting to make sure that their children had a house of their own. The needs are individual, but cash is ubiquitous. It is just one solution that could address all of the problems that we heard about. The current welfare system is set up to punish people instead of actually bringing them out of poverty. Do we want to use programs that work, or do we want to penalize people for being poor? Because right now, most federal and state policies are doing the latter. MMT was the first guaranteed income project in our country to focus explicitly on racial and gender justice. It's impossible to talk about economic justice and economic liberation without accounting for race and gender. Yet so many of our economic policies fail to embody that. It shocked many people that the program only focused on Black mothers living in extreme poverty. But I believe in being intentional with our approach. And I also believe in calling out what needs to be called out, because if we're not willing to do the work to name what is wrong with our systems, we are not willing to do the hard work necessary to repair our systems. I want everyone in our country to be able to live a life of financial security. And I also think that when you have a small program, having the ability to use your limited resources to targeting to the most impact, it provides the most help and allows you to go further with your data and your proof of concepts. Sue's next slide. So what are we learning? I know I'm talking to academicians, so I'm so glad you all asked. Giving people cash works. When we started this work, we really needed a proof of concept. The majority of the families that we work with make less than $12,000 annually. Less than $12,000 annually. And these are individuals who are working, but we are a country still where our federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. So we have individuals working 2 and 3 jobs and still not having the ability to make ends meet. By providing the resources with the Magnolia Mothers Trust, we are in essence doubling the income of a lot of the families that we work with. And what it is that we have seen has been nothing short of life-changing in the last 3 years that we've been doing this work. We are seeing that mothers have the ability to pay their bills. They can save for emergencies. They are able to make sure that they are not living in households that are food insecure. Many of them have told us that they feel like they're good parents for the first time because they can say yes to some of the things that their kids want, not just the things that their kids are always needing. And I'm not going to sit here and say that cash is the bomb for all of our ailments. Much more is needed to eradicate poverty within this country and to truly value the lives of Black women. But what it is that I can say is that we are looking at the bigger picture using a success of our program to continue to advocate for cash-based policies at the national, federal level, which is what we really need to ensure that we are getting to financial security for all. And so I've told you a little bit about what we've seen as it relates to the numbers, but what else that we've seen that we don't talk about enough as it relates to guaranteed income is joy. A lot of times when we talk about cash, we have a tendency to focus on economic impact. And yes, consumer sovereignty is important. And yes, we are a capitalistic society. So we always want to say, well, what are people able to buy? Or how are people using the money? That's important. But this is one side of the story. We are seeing individuals show up with joy, really centering themselves into the conversation about their future in ways that we have never seen before, and in ways that I did not even think were possible when we started this work 3 years ago. And we don't talk about joy enough, specifically as it relates to Black women and Black individuals. And I think that it's a small concept that allows you to imagine a greater future. Another feature is really how we go about getting to that adjacent possible. And so when talking about joy, I think it's important. And I think in talking about joy is how we really began to flip the script on poverty, y'all, because that's just as important as well. Flipping the script, shifting the narrative, not only that our country tells about poor Black women, but that they tell about themselves. They are daring to dream for the first time. They believe in themselves and their ability to forge a future for themselves and their families. Rewriting your own narrative is much more powerful than anything anyone can ever write on your behalf. One of my favorite TED Talks is The Danger of a Single Story. In this talk, novelist Adichie Warren said, if we only hear a single story about someone, we risk a critical misunderstanding. Regarding Black women, stigmatizing labels are mostly what they are always hearing about themselves and what they are capable of. The reality is that these mothers are working tirelessly to provide for themselves and their families, to survive against a punitive system and poverty traps designed for their failure, not their future. If we begin to change the narrative on poverty, then we all can learn and gain. And so we have been working tirelessly. Sue's next slide. We've been working tirelessly this last year to make sure that we are doing just that. Changing the narrative on poverty by changing the narrator, making sure that the women that we work with are centered in the conversations regarding how they go about actualizing themselves, their families, their dreams, and talking about their lives. So these are just a few snapshots of the amazing women that I have an opportunity to work with day in and day out. We have a fabulous partnership with Ms. Magazine, where twice a month our women are featured in the magazine, where it is op-eds that they write themselves, talking about whatever it is they want to talk about, because there are multiple sides of poverty, and we don't have to lean into the side of poverty where it is always a dire situation. It's them sharing what they want to share about themselves and their families. So where we're going, this work started, like Natalie was saying, way back in 2016. Economic Security Project started thinking about it way back in 2017. Springboard to Opportunity started thinking about it and launched the Magnolia Mothers Trust. Since that time, you all, drum roll please. Sue's next slide. Oh, Natalie, this is you.
The drum roll. All right. No, that's right. But since that's exactly right. Because in those early years, we thought this is going to be slow going. Okay. This is going to be a 10-year journey to really, prove what we're talking about here. And Aisha would build the Adjacent Possible in Jackson. Mayor Tubbs would build it in Stockton. It would start to grow. And, we thought it would be cities and states as the laboratories of democracy, ultimately adding up to some federal change, maybe in this far, 10, 20-year time horizon, because that's how long social change takes. But actually, COVID would hit and it would change everything. It would mean that cities and states would be innovating at more rapid rates than we ever could have imagined, alongside a real conversation at the federal level about guaranteeing an income for families with children. It would happen all at once when the adjacent possible would become the possible. When everything grounded to a halt in the early days of the pandemic, it became clear that cash was the currency of urgency. And that is where we were as a nation. We needed to move money to people fast so they could just put food on the table and take care of the basics. And the federal government, policymakers, elected officials learned that Cash One gives people flexibility to cover their most pressing needs, whether it be food, rent, housing, debt, being able to pay for kids going back to school, all things you heard Aisha talking about in the Magnolia Mothers Trust, we were now seeing at the federal level. We would learn too that cash was efficient and an effective way to achieve an immediate drop in poverty and food insecurity among families, reminding us that indeed poverty is a policy choice that our current capitalism is making, and that we can make a very different policy choice as a country to eliminate poverty. And finally, that cash gives people time and resilience. I really love what Aisha's saying about the joy she sees with her mothers. One of the experiences I've had in talking to people about what cash transfers and monthly cash income floor has meant in their lives is just more time. They talk about what they buy. We buy food, we pay down debt, we pay off utilities, but also the time people buy by quitting a third job, by, and the stress, the reduction in stress that people feel. So ultimately, Congress would move out 3 rounds of stimulus checks to people over the last 2 years. Between the stimulus checks, PPP, and the pandemic unemployment insurance that were supporting both people out of work and people running small businesses during the pandemic, and monthly checks to support parents raising their kids, known as the child tax credit. That would be the center of the American Rescue Plan. Now, these cash supports weren't just about solving the pandemic. They were accelerating policymakers' understanding of cash as a tool to create economic security beyond the pandemic, to build back better using monthly cash as a tool. Now, I say policymakers' understanding because people understood this viscerally. People have understood it. Poll after poll shows that the stimulus checks, that the child tax credit, they are very popular policies. I want to show you a quick video that I think will work this time of activists who are delivering petitions to their elected officials. It's 2 million petition signatures calling for monthly cash transfers. And this is just some of the activity that has happened over the last several years.
We're asking for our representatives to please step up and support our communities.
Recurring cash stimulus direct to the people, cut out the middleman, cut out the need to qualify in certain ways.
Senator Manchin, I hope that the messages you hear help you understand that this is what the people of West Virginia need.
I think this is also a question of values. It's a question of who we are as a country, and it's a question, do we really want to recover, and not just recover, but build back better from where we were? Because before COVID-19, the economy wasn't working for working people.
That's what we're calling on, is help to, at the end of this pandemic, to be able to be survivors together.
Thank you all so much. And your grassroots advocacy work in gathering 2 million signatures, 2 million voices, 2 million demanding that we have human dignity during this global public health crisis.
It was out of this work that support for the expanded child tax credit would grow, monthly checks to parents with no strings attached. But I'll turn it over to Aisha to talk more about.
So because so much of the foundation had been laid prior to COVID, when COVID hit, we were positioned and advocates were ready to do what advocates do. Act. Out of this work in the last year and a half, there are currently over 100 guaranteed income pilots in some form of iteration within this country. There's the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, which is a task force or a consortium of community-based organizations and stakeholders really thinking about or implementing guaranteed income within their communities. And there's the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, which is a consortium of mayors of various cities who have committed to piloting guaranteed income within their communities. MMT will continue as the longest running guaranteed income project in this country. And Chicago just announced this week, as well as Los Angeles, the city of Chicago will be providing 5,000 Chicago families with $500 using funding from the American Rescue Plan. In the Chicago pilot, alongside the mayor of, in the Los Angeles pilot under the leadership of their mayor, is providing 3,000 families with $1,000 a month. Both community-based and city-led projects are important as we demonstrate that individual programs can have a universal impact. Collectively, all of these efforts are pushing towards the same North Star. Even though our implementation may be different, community-based organizations such as Magnolia Mothers Trust, city-led effort in Chicago, we all have the same North Star, which is centering the needs of families in the conversation around economic liberation and really pushing towards federal policy. And so we have continued rise of guaranteed income, but we also have, as Natalie was just saying, the child tax credit. And the child tax credit is basically a guaranteed income for families with kids having the potential to cut child poverty by half within this country. The first check started in July, and the resources that these families have received have been nothing but life-changing. We're going to show a short clip of some of the voices from individuals who have received the child tax credit and really talking about what these resources have provided.
For Jennifer Dickman in North Carolina, it's a life-changing $500 a month.
Child tax credit money has really helped us with our medical expenses. I have 2 special needs kids.
The expanded payments that began in July as part of the American Rescue Plan impacted tens of millions of families immediately.
If my kids need this for schooling, I got it. If I need gas to take them to here and there, I got it.
That went to an air conditioner, which was so helpful. I was worried about my son becoming dehydrated.
I bought my son's school supplies. I bought pull-ups and wipes for my daughters.
But the payments expire at the end of this year, unless Congress passes some version of the human infrastructure bill that is central to President Biden's economic agenda. Jhumpa Bhattacharya at the left-leaning Research Center Insight says it's needed more than ever.
She can go ahead and stop. Thank you. Thank you for that. And so really just wanted to bring in a few of the voices of individuals who we work with as well as other partners throughout the country and sharing the impact of this work. Because like I said, we're working to change the narrative on poverty. In order to do that, we have to make sure that we hear the voices of those who are really being impacted. And how powerful to be able to say, I got it. Just 3 simple words, but as a parent, I understand how wonderful and how powerful that is to be able to say, I got it, as it relates to my kids' needs. And so, Natalie, friend, what's next?
For Jennifer Dick.
So the child tax credit passed in the American Rescue Plan, and it has meant, as you heard, that 6 checks will have gone out. We have the next one this week, the 5th check this week. The 6th check goes out in December. And if Congress doesn't act, that's the end. And I think what's exciting is there is a real demand for the child tax credit, which is a guaranteed income for families with children, being part of how we build back better. So it is a centerpiece in the Build Back Better agenda that we just got word earlier today. The House will vote on sometime in the coming weeks. And it's a real nail biter, frankly, of a historic investment. But if it passes, it means that for the next year, families can count on monthly checks to help raise their families in the way they see fit, in addition to their wages and their work that they currently do. And we'll be joining the rest of the developed world who have a child allowance already and saying that this is what families deserve in the United States. So we're very close, but we have to win it and make sure that it becomes a cornerstone of social policy that we can build on, frankly. And I think that, and I hope that puts a nail on the coffin of the way we've done policy for the last 50 years in America that says, you are only worth what you do in the world, as opposed to being every human has dignity and worth inside, and we can build policy that says just that. So what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is, if this is inspiring to you, if the child tax credit has meant something in your life, if there are families you love for whom you know the child tax credit has meant something in their lives, you can get involved. Which one thing that's needed is to make sure you call your member of Congress and you go onto their website, write a letter about how important it is they extend the expanded child tax credit, a guaranteed income for families with children. Post about it on Facebook and social. The next check, they come the 15th of each month. They're debited out directly from the IRS to families' accounts if you are connected automatically to the IRS. If you're not, then you get a paper check. But it's really important that parents know this is what it's like for the government to invest in, and this country, for us to decide we want to invest in families. And that's one big part of what you can do.
So I am an anti-poverty advocate. So I have to envision and believe in a world without poverty, this country where everyone has the resources they need to live a life of dignity and humility for themselves and their families. It's not so far-fetched. As I said when I started, for all of our ability to analyze and critique, we have become rooted in what is rather than what could be. But we can only get to this adjacent possible of this place where everyone is thriving if we move beyond our own individual needs and comforts and begin to view life as a collective, as shared responsibility, truly leaning into the 2020 catchphrase, we're all in this together. But were we then, and are we now? I urge others to join in this journey of envisioning a world of abundance where prosperity is shared rather than hoarded, in which we view our neighbor's child living in poverty as abhorrent as our own, and where we recognize that all of our fates are tied together, that we all do better when we all do better. As the iconic Toni Morrison said, if you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. Let us all heed these wise words as we work to build a world as we dream it, not as it is. Thank you so much for having us. I feel like we need some play us off music, Natalie.
I think that there's a plan for Q&A. Yeah, great.
It is, I know.
It is. Thank you. I'm sorry for the uncomfortable pause, but everyone gets to scribble down all the Twitter feeds, and I hope everyone is thinking deeply about all your wonderful words and your presentation. So folks, there's a Q&A box. Please insert any questions or comments or reactions. It doesn't have to be a question necessarily. Let me say, let's see right away that someone posted a message that I was going to say it, just a message to say the speakers are offering us transformative information. I'm grateful for the speakers, their efforts, and those who brought the speakers to us tonight. Thank you. So that's a really nice way to start.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Here is your first question. For those of us in positions to advocate for a portion of locally allocated ARP dollars to be spent on guaranteed income pilots, how would you respond to elected officials worried about the sustainability of these projects? Help me make the case. Thank you.
Natalie, you want to go first?
Sure. I think that's a really great question, because the answer is that the sustainability is not from local cities demonstrating this idea, or from philanthropy backing demonstrations around the country as it's happened in Jackson and hundreds of other cities that the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, which Aisha co-chairs along with my colleague Natalie, hold. That is not the answer. That will not get us out of this. What creates a guaranteed income is policy. Policy that says this worked here, and we will make this a cornerstone of social policy for American families moving forward. That's the way we scale these ideas. So I think the case to be made is our job right now is to demonstrate that it's possible, to show what it will mean in our community for these families to tell their stories and push that to scale the idea at the federal level.
Ditto with all of that. So I've never made the case for sustainability within our work. Every time I talk about our work, it really is that we are providing a proof of concept. We are adding additional data into a very necessary database as we build the case for federal legislation. And I think all of that data is important because we are so used to leaning into what the status quo and what it is that we have been doing within this country that we need a plethora of data to work beyond that status quo and really get people to lean into the possibility of other things.
So I think what I'm hearing is little redirect the conversation, right? Away from sustainability, because that's not sort of a reasonable way to even think about, like reframing how to think about this. Does that sound?
That's exactly right. For me, sustainability at the local level, it's not possible. That's not even practical for us to think that any one philanthropist or any one institutions at a state level or city level could sustain what is necessary within guaranteed income. It really is about federal policy. And so it is, like you were saying, Lisa, it's redirecting or reframing, and making sure that the appropriate question is being asked. And the appropriate question is, how is it what it is that we learn with our work? What is that entry point into the data? And how will we be providing critical infrastructure and critical knowledge into conversations that are already being held? And how do we go about elevating those critical conversations?
And I think too, like leaning into the concept of the laboratories of democracy. Right now, if there's a city who wants to do this, that is exactly what they're doing. They are demonstrating this idea, and it will ultimately inform, the bigger picture. So I think that the redirect is right.
Well, yeah, especially the reframe. So here we go. Second question. There's a growing body of research that shows that economic supports also help to reduce child abuse and neglect. Will you be studying the impact of guaranteed income pilots on child well-being?
So we are looking at it as child well-being in a different level. It's a lot of different ways to go about defining and operationalizing child well-being. We are operationalizing it really with a futuristic aspect and how kids feel that their futures are now different and how their parents are able to show up differently within the home because of the stress that is alleviated by not having to worry about their income during that year time frame. We are also looking at child well-being because with our work, we set up 529 accounts. So we're investing in the kids' future. So we're also looking at, okay, our children's outlook for their lives and what's possible. Is that changed as well? And so that's how we're choosing to operationalize it. I know that there are some guaranteed incomes that are defining child well-being as it relates to what is physically happening within the home, as well as educationally, what is happening within academia. We're taking a slightly different approach and wanting to really lean into joy, future outlooks, agencies, and how kids are just thinking about their life being a little different because of what happens with this year. And I am so excited about when 10 years from now, when one of our kids is graduating and they're giving their valedictorian speech and they say, you know what? 10 years ago or some time frame ago, my mama got this money from somebody and it changed our lives. That is what I am really looking forward to. And that's how I am operationalizing child well-being, because I know it's possible. I know it will happen. I know just in my own family and our family's testimony that, my grandmother received an education from some institution years ago, and that changed our family's trajectory and what has been possible for all of us.
Thank you for that. There was another question related to this about, do we have more data about the positive impact of these policies? So grades of students and graduation rates, percentage of parents who only need to work one job. And I think, there's already been some conversation about how that data is accumulating. Natalie or Aisha, can you comment on what's happening with the other pilots going on? Maybe some of the Mayors for Guaranteed Income pilots and efforts to sort of collate across a really exciting potential body of research that's going to be coming up the pipeline in the next few years.
Yeah, I think I'll first point to Stockton. Stockton ran for 24 months of demonstration. 125 families received $500 a month with no strings attached. And the researchers who have now started a center at Penn, the Guaranteed Income Center for Guaranteed Income Studies.
Yeah, that's
what it is. Are now coordinating research in dozens of these cities that are launching demonstrations. But what we learned from Stockton is really, it's many things, but two things stand out to me. One is that people continue to work alongside a guaranteed income, and in fact do so at higher rates and have jobs that they are more excited about, a managerial track, higher wages, whatever it is. So they found that those who received the guaranteed income found full-time employment at double the rate that the control group over a course of 24 months prior to the pandemic. But the other finding tracks so much of what Aisha just said around stress and well-being, that there was a significant decline in stress levels for people. People reported going off anti-anxiety medication that they had to carry around with them because of the pressure of being able to make ends meet in America today. They were able to leave that behind because there was just a little more room to breathe. So that is some of the data that has come out of Stockton. And I look forward, I think, to hearing the data that comes out of the dozens of additional pilots that are just getting up and going at all different times.
Yeah. Aisha,
is there anything you want to add to that?
No, you ditto. I was like, I can't wait for all of the flood of data to enter into the research stratosphere within the next year.
Yeah. Let me put out another question, which is on many people's minds, I'm sure, is, this is a topic that has proven to be very politically divisive, as we've seen. And so how have the two of you, I think you demonstrated some examples of this in your presentation, but talk us through how to think about this work, how to embrace it, how to be engaged in it, how to be prepared, right? When it flies completely contrary to the American dream narrative, which is how someone posed it on the Q&A, right? So you mentioned the pick up your bootstraps, and perhaps picking up on that point might be helpful.
Yeah, so I'll go first. At least I'll be real honest. The way I address it depends on really how I feel that day. Like if I'm having, honestly, like if you catch me and I'm having a really good day and everything is working, you will get the politically correct, CEO answer. If you get me on a bad day, I really may just call out the racism and sexism that's rooted in this idea that you can't give individuals resources and trust, that we have to always lean into the, oh, well, what will they do with the money? Or how are you going to go about policing what they do with the money? At the root of all of those questions.
Or I did okay, why can't they do okay? That's the
and Lisa, I have said to somebody before, I don't care about you or your mama, but that was a bad day. That was a really bad day. I don't suggest that. But, for me in doing it, and I think Natalie's answer will be different just because of where we are and who we are in doing the work. So I'm a practitioner. I'm a Black woman in Mississippi raising resources to give to other Black women. So the amount of racism and sexism that I constantly have to deal with when I am advocating for this work, it's a ridiculous concept. And so I recognize that so much of that is rooted in this ideal of deservedness and who we have told is entitled to a good life. And I know that that is rooted in racism. And so I now am at the place where I can call that out. I am well aware that I have situational power. I am well aware that I am not going to get counseled by my board, and that I can say the things that need to be said, because when we don't say the things that need to be said, it gives individuals passes to go about saying those things and holding on to those ideologies that are not rooted in reality. And if I do nothing else as a part of this work, is to really get people to look into themselves and realign their values and really ensure that who they are when no one is looking is who they are when they are being performative. I've done my job and I'm happy.
Yeah, I just think that is so right on, Aisha. Your work has pushed all of us to challenge notions of deservedness built into policy and built into our own assumptions. And I think that while that's happening, that is the work that has to happen, is a shift in mindset and a shift in national story that we tell. And then I think there are a few places where the idea of a guaranteed income does resonate with people on both sides of the aisle. And I'd point to a couple of places. One is this concept of agency and freedom. Every parent deserves the freedom and the agency to raise their children how they see fit. They know what's needed. They know best what's needed. Each week it's something different in family finances. One week it's a transmission that needs to get fixed, and the next week it's school uniforms for football and soccer and sports that have to be purchased, and then the next week it's rent. And so cash allows families the freedom and the agency, and I think that is something that should be, supported on either side of the aisle. And I also think entrepreneurship, that people have the support needed to take a risk to invest in themselves, to pursue a dream, whether it's going back to school, which Aisha has several of her mothers who were able to do that after becoming part of Magnolia Mothers Trust, or it's opening up a business and working for yourself, your own hours that work for your family. Those are the kinds of things that I think should really work across both sides of the aisle. And I will just say, this does have bipartisan appeal. There are leaders in each party who are leading on this, and I would hope that there are others who could follow them in each party. So I point to Mitt Romney, who has a child tax credit plan that would expand the child tax credit for families in this country. And so it is my hope that members of Congress and the Senate and elected officials on both sides of the aisle will listen to the people they serve and actually support this idea.
Okay, terrific. Let's see. Andrew Yang has been making a case recently that open primaries and ranked choice voting are the keys to how we can make some big structural changes happen. What are your thoughts about political innovations such as final five voting to change the incentives for voters, candidates, and legislators, presumably as an avenue and a mechanism for also policy change? I'm presuming from this question. So changing our political system, right, as a mechanism for changing our policy.
I have to defer to Natalie. Because
yeah, that's a tough question.
I have nothing positive to say about that, so I'm just going to be quiet. And Natalie doesn't either, so we're going to ask for the next question.
Okay, that's totally fine. Are the Magnolia trust moms only single mothers, and how does father involvement or child support fit in? Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So I'm trying to see how to say this. So they are single mothers operate, how it's defined on paper. So single in the fact that they're not married. Are they single in the fact that they may be in committed relationships or in long-term relationships or common law married and those pieces? No, they are all not. And I think that's another policy issue as well, by virtue of the fact that our mothers live in federally subsidized affordable housing, and there are rules as it relates to who can live within those communities. And so the fact that in a lot of situations, you have to demonstrate that no one within your home has a record. And we know that with the over-incarceration of Black and brown men, that a lot of Black men may have a record. And so we are still, even though we're not where we were in the 60s and 70s, where your social worker could come in and look to see who was in your house and say, oh, I see some boots. We're not there. We still have a long way to go in really making sure that we are not putting harmful practices in place that make it where families have to separate from each other legally in order to maintain the stability that they need.
Natalie, do you have, I think some of the income pilots actually might be directly targeting fathers in different ways. So it's fathers are excluded from this entire endeavor of guaranteed income. Is that
no?
right?
And that's, so the beauty with guaranteed income is that guaranteed income projects can be targeted towards your particular population. Right. So, there are so many, some are now targeting expectant mothers. Some are targeting, individuals who are coming out, who are re-entering society, coming from being incarcerated. Some are targeting youth aging out of the foster care system. So there are a plethora of ways in which guaranteed income is currently being piloted and talked about and innovated within this country. So, there are several, like you were also saying, Lisa, that's focused specifically on fathers and the role that they play within the family, and the fact in a lot of instances, individuals feel that they may be overlooked. Our work specifically, like I say, targets Black mothers who on paper are single, and the rationale for that is because we really do understand that so few Black mothers have been allowed the ability to have income and build wealth at the same rate that men and white men and others within this country have been allowed to.
Yeah. And I just point out, it's actually a southern city that's looking at fathers with its guaranteed income pilot. It's Mayor Steve Benjamin in Columbia. Will be targeting fathers with his pilot as part of dozens of pilots that are happening, led by mayors around the country.
Love to see it. Oh.
Yeah, and I think Durham might actually be considering targeting formerly incarcerated individuals. I hope I'm not leaking any. I don't think that's private. It's a consideration, I know. All right. Next up here, Natalie, I think you'll be really well positioned to answer this question. What are the strategies to prevent a benefits cliff situation? For example, a family that moves out of federally subsidized housing, if that is the population being targeted. So a general question about the many existing, social safety nets in our country are income targeted. And so how does a guaranteed income interplay with those means tested programs?
Aisha, why don't you actually start and maybe explain what a benefits
cliff is?
I
can start. Yeah, I can definitely start. So
and then I can talk about policy.
Yeah, the benefits cliff is a serious problem, which every time I have a conversation about guaranteed income, we have to talk about the benefits cliff, which is a significant failure of the fact that our system is punitive, that whenever we consider that you are giving individuals money, how would all of their other resources be impacted? It's something that families have to negotiate daily. And that's problematic. So that's when, you get a new job, that your benefits will be impacted in all of those pieces. So when we started our work in 2018, there were no policies or no best practices for how to go about doing this. We knew that we wanted to do good without doing harm. And so we set out to make sure that we provided enough resources, taking hypothesis and working with economists and attorneys. That's how we landed on $1,000. We were like, we feel like that's a safe enough bet that any reduction in benefits would be captured. But then also, I hate to talk about this because at least there's so much of it, it depends because everything is state by state. But also for our population was so low income that we knew no one would lose benefits. We knew there would be a reduction of benefits, but we weren't worried that someone would lose their housing or some of the other pieces. What it is that we've learned is that on average, our mothers have a reduction of $300 to $400. They still have the net gain of $600 to $700. But let's fast forward. So now we are in 2021, COVID hit, all of these guaranteed income projects are happening. Everyone's like, okay, how do we figure out the benefits cliff? A lot of states and cities have gone about getting waivers in order to ensure that benefits are protected. But then also the Federal Reserve in Atlanta specifically has developed a resource where participants can go in, and there's an intersection, there's an interface where you can go in and calculate what your reduction of benefits will be if you receive a guaranteed income based on all of the other subsidies or vouchers or benefits that you are receiving within the social safety net. So there has been a lot of work that has been done over the last few years, but the fact that we are still having to talk about benefits being lost as it relates to giving people cash is a significant policy failing still that we've got to get to the place that we are addressing.
And this is the experience for the pilots, right, that are philanthropically funded or funded by state dollars, but are kind of pulled out of the system and therefore impact the system in the way it was, built over the last many decades. If we do this as policy, as the future of social policy, it won't count as income, right? That is the advantage of using the tax code. So the child tax credit checks, which go directly into every parent's bank account on the 15th, doesn't count as income, won't adversely impact their benefits. If we expand and modernize the existing tax code, like the earned income tax credit, if we make it monthly, if we expand the amount, if we expand the definition of work to include unpaid caregiving and all kinds of, work that has been unpaid for millennia, then that won't count as income either. So I think there's a very good case to move quickly to policy so that it doesn't impact people's lives.
Like right now, let's do it.
Right now.
Okay, wonderful. Let me see if there's another question here that we have not answered yet. I don't think so.
This has been delightful. Thank you, Sulzberger family. Thank you, Natalie.
Maybe we could, I don't know if the Sulzberger family would like to add any other questions or commentary. Would invite them if they'd like to.
So good.
Thank you so much.
Anyone on the spot.
Thank you, Natalie and Aisha, for that really inspiring talk. And thank you, Lisa, for leading us through the discussion. That was just really incredible, and it's given us a lot to think about. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and especially Cindy and Stephen. Thank you for joining us.
Sorry, we couldn't figure out, but we just wanted to say thank you so much. And this was fascinating and a lot to think about and take away from. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for this talk. I'd like to encourage all of our participants to click on the link in the chat to give us feedback on this event. I also wanted to let you know about 2 upcoming events in the Center for Child and Family Policy in Sanford that you might be interested in. First up in January, on January 18th, we're co-hosting Center for Child and Family Policy with the Sanford School, the Crown Lecture on Ethics, featuring Dr. Jeanette Betancourt, who's the Senior Vice President for U.S. Social Impact at Sesame Workshop. And she'll be talking about equity and inclusion on Sesame Street. So please join us for that one on January 18th. Our next Sulzberger lecture is on January 20th, and it'll be Duke alum Denise Forte, who's the interim CEO of the Education Trust. Her talk is entitled The Power of Advocacy, Leveraging an Unprecedented Opportunity for Educational Equity and Justice. So I hope that many of you will be able to join us for that one as well. Thanks so much. Again, we really appreciate all of you joining us, and thanks to our speakers for a really inspiring talk. Good night, everybody.